I've been itching. I've been itching to get back. I've been on vacation, so I missed yesterday. Just back from Florida and had to get back in front of the mic to talk about Bam Rodriguez's special performance, back-to-back special performances, and people who don't follow the lower weight classes won't be able to put this into proper perspective. But this is a special talent that we're watching coming up. I say that the same thing about Shakur Stevenson at 130. Bam, the same thing, except Bam, a more entertaining fan. So we're looking at a guy who is going to be a draw and has pound for pound type talent as well in the lower weight classes. And you don't have too many draws in the lower weight class, but he's going to be one of them. This is a guy who's going to be able to sell in Dallas. In San Antonio. He's going to be able to sell in Houston. He's going to be able to sell in Dallas. He's going to be able to sell in Phoenix. He's going to be able to sell in Los Angeles. So we have a guy who is going to be able to sell, entertaining in the lower weight classes. He's going to bring eyes to the lower weight classes. So it's going to be fun for a guy like myself who follows the lower weight classes and wishes these guys would get more eyes on them to respect their ability and what they bring to the table, what they bring to boxing the table, because people don't follow almost half of the weight classes in boxing. And it's frustrating to watch when so much entertainment value is below 130. And we're seeing that when we watch a guy like Bam Rodriguez fight. What a talent we have. And I'll be talking about my pound for pound list. I'll be talking about the young American talent coming up, guys like Bam, guys like Boots, guys like Virgil, guys like Shakur, and others that are coming up, what separates them so far, and more. And also be talking about Canelo versus Triple G later on in the podcast as well, because I have my thoughts on that. And watching the press conference, I can't believe, watching these press conferences between Golovkin and Canelo, that more people did not want to see this, or more people said they didn't want to see this. But the eyeballs and the views to these press conferences and the amount of chatter that's going on YouTube and social media tells us different, that people do want to see this fight. They do want to see this trilogy. They do want to see this finally put to bed. And this is a great rivalry, and we'll get more to that in a minute. First, let me bring up my pound for pound list up on the screen. This is my updated pound for pound. Inoue number 1, Usyk 2, Crawford 3, Canelo 4, Jermell 5, Errol Spence 6, Dimitri Bivol 7, Beterbiev 8, Shakur Stevenson 9. Now, my top 9 has not changed from last week, but what has changed is 10 through 12. Stephen Fulton has dropped out of the top 12. Bam Rodriguez is the new entry. I have him now number 10 on my pound for pound list. And I said this coming in: if Bam Rodriguez wins this fight in impressive fashion against Sor Rungvisai, a real life boogeyman at 115, a real life boxing boogeyman, and does it in impressive fashion, then he enters my pound for pound list. And he actually exceeded my expectations. More on that in a minute as I break down the fight. Chocolatito number 11, Devin Haney number 12. Both of those guys dropped one spot, and Stephen Fulton dropped out of the rankings, and Lomachenko dropped out of the rankings a couple weeks ago. Now, pound for pound is meant to be volatile. Remember that. So guys can leave the rankings, come back in the rankings, but a couple things pop out to me as I look at these rankings. Half of these guys on my rankings I would not have had in my pound for pound rankings last year. And that tells me that we're in a healthy spot in boxing. When boxing is healthy, we have guys who are established in their prime, a little past their prime, still fighting top fights, who are hanging on to pound for pound rankings and who are hanging on to top divisional rankings. But we have the young lions coming up who are nipping at their toes, right? And you see that in the Lion Kingdom, where you have the old lion who has to take on the young lions, and the young lions eventually flush out the older lions, right? But you have older lions hanging on, and you have that on this pound for pound list. You got guys like Crawford, Spence, who have been around for a while, hanging on to the rankings. Chocolatito at number 11. And you asked me why I have Chocolatito at number 11 is because I had him beating Gallo Estrada. So I have him in my rankings ahead of Gallo Estrada. And I think 115 is the strongest division in boxing. So I have to have I think it's the strongest and deepest division from top to bottom in boxing. So I have two guys at 115 in my top pound for pound list. And I think people who don't, I don't know. I don't know how close enough attention people pay to lower weight classes in boxing. But 115 is a Shark Tank. So half of these guys weren't in my pound for pound last year. So that tells me that this recycling process that we have in boxing, that we have to have in boxing to keep it healthy, where we have older talent hanging on and we have younger talent coming up, recycling those guys, is happening in boxing. That's what this pound for pound list tells me. When we have guys like Better Biev, Shakur Stevenson, Bivol, and Bivol and Better Biev have been around for a while, but not at the level that we've seen this year where they've stepped up and won big fights. And on top of that, we've got guys like Bam, Devin Haney entering the rankings, Stephen Fulton right outside the rankings. Guys are starting to come up and make claims to be on pound for pound lists. This has been the year 2022 of top guys putting on top performances. This has been the year of great performances. So it backs up what I've said. And Bam, one of the many reasons I picked Bam to beat Soren Vise is there's a trend going on in boxing of top fighters putting on great performances. This is a great performance year. So it's tough to get on pound for pound rankings, but it's become even tougher to stay on. Guys like Lomachenko have fallen off of mine. Stephen Fulton has fallen off mine. I've had a couple guys that I put on the pound for pound list that I've had to take off pretty quickly because guys keep making claims, making great performances, and putting themselves on the pound for pound list. It's a volatile list, and when boxing is healthy, it should be a volatile list. It should be a list that is less volatile as it goes up, right? When you get to 1 to 5, you want guys to stay on those lists at 1 to 5, right? You want guys who are established, who are going to stay there until a young lion comes and picks them off, right? And we have that in boxing. We guys like Inoue, Usyk, Crawford, Canelo, Jamel. We have a healthy top 5, 6. Canelo coming off of a loss, but I still think he built up enough equity to stay top 5, top 6. So you want a list that at the top is not as volatile, but at the bottom, it's very volatile because you got a bunch of guys making claims to get on the pound for pound list. And they do that by fighting top competition in their division and putting on great performances. And Bam has added to that list this past weekend. Canelo real beef with GGG is when GGG called him out using PEDs. Yeah, more on that in a minute. I don't watch those lower weight classes. I ain't watching two puppies go at it. Fair enough. Miss Bam's last 2 fights, so he's that good, huh? I got to check it. You have to check him out. And more on that in a minute. Canelo Triple G3 is a great fight now that Canelo lost. Canelo, before the loss, had no business fighting Triple G. It was way too many other guys more deserving of that shot. More on that in a minute. Shout out Chicano Prophet. But as far as the fight goes, Bam Rodriguez, for those who didn't see the fight, Bam's a special talent. He reminds me of 126 Lomachenko. How he puts together combination punches, the way you put together combination punches that fly off the screen to people who are looking for the eye test is you have to have your feet set constantly. You have to have your balance constantly. And it's tough. Anybody who has ever boxed on any level will tell you how difficult balance is, particularly when you're moving. It's like a great quarterback. A great quarterback can throw going away from his body, right? Can throw going back in the pocket, can throw off of his back foot, can throw off of his front foot. Same thing in boxing. When you have a guy who can fight off of his back foot, still throw with power, can fight off of his front foot, and more on that in a minute because I was impressed with how Bam fought off of his front foot in this fight. Lateral movement, he's still throwing punches with power, and he never loses his balance. And the constant shifting that he uses, it, like I said, it reminds me of 126 Lomachenko, how this guy can shift and throw punches as he's shifting and then switch from southpaw to conventional, still throwing punches. His offense and defense is a constant flow. They're meshed together. There's no break in between his offense and his defense. Picking off shots and throwing as he's picking off shots. It's all there. This guy has everything. Everything. And I was high on him before this fight. If we rewind to the last time we talked, Bam Rodriguez, I said, I thought would beat Sor Rungvisai by decision, and that Sor Rungvisai would have moments throughout the fight. And that did not happen. Sor Rungvisai didn't have too many moments throughout the fight. Bam Rodriguez arguably wins every round. And by the way, rains down punches on him in the 8th round and stops him. And not too many people saw a stoppage going into this fight. Sor Rungvisai is a tough SOB. You don't knock that guy out. You don't stop him. You don't stop him with attrition. You don't knock him out. And Bam Rodriguez did that. He just beat Carlos Cuadras. He's sticking around at 115, which is a Shark Tank, and he's taking on all comers, and he's doing it in brutal fashion. This isn't just a boxer. This is a guy with a mean streak. This is a guy who can knock you out. This is a guy who can outbox you. This is a guy with lateral movement. This is a guy with shiftiness. He's got it all, and he looks to have it all up here. We have a guy who just quietly retired, Mikey Garcia, who looked good when he was at 126, 130, 135. But as he moved up, you started to see the deficiencies up here in Mikey Garcia. You started to see a guy who didn't really care about boxing. Special talent, didn't really care about boxing. Showed deficiencies, didn't look all there when it came to fights, didn't fight top competition. So the people comparing Bam to Mikey, it's not going to add up. As time goes on, you're going to see Bam start to separate himself from a guy like Mikey Garcia, who had the talent but didn't have everything else to go along with the talent, didn't have the mean streak, didn't have the killer instinct, didn't have high boxing IQ, didn't have mental toughness. And Bam is going to separate himself from guys like that. I'm telling you, this is a can't-miss talent up there with Shakur Stevenson. And when we look at the young American talent coming up, we talk about guys like Bam Rodriguez, Devin Haney, Shakur Stevenson, Boots Ennis, Virgil Ortiz, among others. We talk about these guys. And what separates so far Bam Rodriguez and say Devin Haney from the rest of the pack is these guys have already fought, or Shakur Stevenson, I should say. These guys have already fought top competition. You can throw Devin Haney in that mix. So there are already guys realizing their potential early. These are guys in their early 20s realizing their potential. Boots Ennis will get there too because the eye test tells us that he's likely a top talent, right? But what separates a guy from Bam and Shakur and the rest of these guys, look, Shakur's about to fight Consecal after beating Oscar Valdez, after beating Jamel Herring. And the Nakathila win is looking better as time goes on. Bam Rodriguez doing the same thing. When you have undeniable talent, your team believes in you, you have confidence in your own ability, and you don't have to hide these guys. You can be aggressive with these guys, and you can move them up the ranks quicker. So therefore, we have a guy 22 years old in Bam Rodriguez. What is Shakur? 24. Devin Haney, 23. All those guys are already on my pound-for-pound top 12, and they're in their early 20s. Young American talent. American boxing is in good hands right now. Good hands right now. These guys are being aggressive. These guys are being active. Bam wants to fight 2 more times this year. And if Bam does, it's going to be tough to edge that guy out for Fighter of the Year. Because to become Fighter of the Year, you cannot fight once in a year. You cannot give a full-time award to a part-time fighter. You want to give part-time fighters awards, give them Performance of the Year, something like that. But you can't give a part-time fighter a full-time award, and Fighter of the Year is a full-time award. You have to fight at least twice, which today we consider a full-time fighter twice a year. Kind of a low bar there. But if we have a guy in Bam Rodriguez who fights 3-4 times in a year, and he's beating guys like Cuadras and Rungvisai, it's going to be tough to edge that guy out. Now, maybe, let's say Spence does fight Crawford, and Spence has wins against Ugas and Crawford, then you got to throw him in the mix as well. So you'll have other guys making claims because this is the year where guys are putting on great performances, but you have to fight more than twice. And Bam is going to get these guys by fighting top competition and doing it often. That's the blueprint. Canelo showed that. Canelo showed that in 2021. If you're fighting often and you're fighting the best guys in your division, minus Benavidez, then you're going to get the accolades behind that. You're going to climb pound for pound rankings. And Bam has seen that. Regardless of who you're rooting for, GGG seems disinterested in promoting this fight. Dude at McDonald's seems more excited when taking my order. We got to see Bam and Chocolatito. Now, shout out my guy, Nando. Shout out Marion Brown in the building as well. I'm going to talk about Canelo Triple G in a minute because I got some heat for you, Nando. I think you're devaluing what my guy Golovkin brings to the table in this trilogy. But Bam versus Chocolatito, that's an interesting thing. What I would like to see, and it's tough to say what I would like to see because there's many different directions you can go at 115. I would love to see Gallo Estrada versus Chocolatito trilogy next. But if we're not going to get that, give us the Franco versus Gallo Estrada fight. That's a mandatory. I think those guys, I don't think the money's going to work there because the purse bid was $120,000, which is minuscule. It's brutal. So I don't know how they're going to make that money work. I don't know if they're going to go through with that fight, but I would love to see a double header. If they're not going to do Chocolatito Estrada next, give me a double header between Chocolatito versus Bam Rodriguez and his brother Franco versus Gallo Estrada and put it in San Antonio. Huge. You can sell out a big venue with that double header right there. Phenomenal. That's what I would like to see if we're not going to get Gallo Estrada versus my guy. I knew Calix was rooting for Canelo. And you meant Triple G. Chicano, I like both guys. And I think people know that. I've been called a Canelo fanboy on this channel more than you can imagine. On Twitter as well. I get that on Twitter on a daily basis. And I've been told the same thing with Golovkin. It's tough when you like both guys. It is, especially on a heated rivalry, because the Canelo fans who I'm usually in the tent with tell me you can't like Golovkin. And the Golovkin fans who I'm in the tent with say the same thing about Canelo. And it's the same thing with Crawford versus Spence because I like both guys, but I'm told I can't like both guys. But it is what it is. I love this trilogy. I just love everything about the Canelo versus Golovkin thing. These guys do not like each other, and I love that. And the fan bases don't like each other, and I love that. I love hated rivals. The Celtics, Lakers of the 80s, right? The Bulls, Knicks of the 90s. I love it. I love hated rivals. Ohio State, Michigan. For a rivalry to be true, the guys have to, on some level, hate each other. Now, there are exceptions to that. Gotti Ward didn't hate each other. But as that trilogy went on, you could see Gotti separate himself from Ward, right? As each fight went on. Second fight, not as good as the first. Third fight, not as good as the second. I felt like it lost some edge, right? Even though it's a great trilogy. This trilogy got better in the second fight than the third fight. And I think the third fight from the second fight will be even better. Maybe I'm in the minority there. I think I am. But the fact that there is so much, there's a lot more interest in this fight than people let on coming in. But first, let me finish my comments on Bam. I think he's a special talent, and I would love to see him fight Chocolatito and Estrada and Ioka. I'd love to see him stick around at 115. They're talking about going back down to 112. That's fine. If he wants to fight top competition there, let his brother handle his business at 115. That seems to be the thing, right? Bam and Garcia want to go back down to 112 so Franco can have his shine at 115 and Bam can have his Josh Franco at 115 and Bam at 112. That seems to be the play there. The brothers don't want to share a division. They want to have their own division, sort of like Jamel and Jamal, rule each division. Fair enough. All I'm saying is Bam is such a special talent. I want to see him in the best division in boxing and try to clear it out. I'd love to see that. Let's see. Come on, Triple G. Triple G has a fan base. Calix will root for whoever he's got money on. That's true. And I'm staying. I'm interested to see what the over-under is going to be because I'm staying away from the result, but the over-under is going to be an interesting, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. The Triple G fan base hardly exists these days, sadly. Triple G fans just feel like he doesn't get the credit he deserves, which he doesn't, in my opinion. He's a legend. Thank you, Marion. Thank you. It's still strong amongst the boxing media, Chicano. But Canelo swearing at Triple G. I'm more excited for Danny Garcia versus Benavidez fight than Triple G. What? What? And by the way, I like Danny Garcia versus Benavidez. That's a sneaky good fight. That's a sneaky good fight. As is Ryan Garcia versus Fortuna. That's a sneaky good fight. Don't sleep on Fortuna in that fight. Shout out General in the building. Buns. Let's see what we got. Hold on. Let me pull this up. Fernando, I see Nando in the chat. Let me pull up this real quick. The screen share. Let's see what we got. Box Rec. Gennady Golovkin. Now, for the Gennady Golovkin detractors out there, this is what I want you to put into proper perspective. This is, let me see if the screen share is up. And it is. Okay, I'm gonna do a little scrolling here. This is Gennady Golovkin's Box Rec. Now, you have to keep in mind that, because I hear, oh, Gennady Golovkin's never been lineal champion at 160. How can he be a great fighter when he wasn't lineal champion at middleweight? Who has he fought, et cetera, et cetera. You have to put into proper perspective that the lineal champs, Sergio Martinez and Miguel Cotto, we're not going to throw out the word duck, but when Golovkin's name was brought up, and Cotto's my guy, and I actually like Sergio Martinez too, and to give Sergio Martinez a little bit of credit, he was on the tail end, right? Even though Sergio Martinez is still fighting off and on. But they didn't really want parts of Triple G, it seemed, even though Triple G wasn't the lineal champ. I take from that you can tell everything you need to know about a fighter by how his handlers handle him and how his peers in his weight class react to him when his name is brought up. When Golovkin's name was brought up back in the day, you saw a lot of, I need to talk to my manager. Cotto forgot English when his name was brought up. My guy, Carl Froch at 168, he got a little stuttery when Golovkin's name was brought up. So that we have to put that in the proper perspective that Golovkin had to fight the best available talent that was presented to him at 160. Matt Macklin. Now, he beat Mac Macklin 9 years ago today by third round KO. He's beating top 10 guys in the weight class, the best guys available to him. He's doing it every 3 to 4 months, fighting 3 times per year on HBO. He beats guys like Macklin, Gill, Rubio, Murray, Lemieux. These are top 10 guys in the weight class. And it's not his fault Kell Brook decided that he wanted to make a power move and move up from 147 to 160. He beat him. And that was a good fight for him to take because he's got a guy in front of him coming up from 147 that he could fight in the UK in front of a big audience with a big name. And he took advantage of that. Danny Jacobs, top 3 guy in the weight class. He beats him. He's doing that as the lineal champions sort of duck him. And then Canelo Alvarez thankfully becomes lineal champion at middleweight by defeating Miguel Cotto. And finally, we have a lineal champion at middleweight who wants to fight the other top guy in the weight class, Gennady Golovkin, the guy who is seen as the middleweight champion, even though he's not the lineal middleweight champion. So Canelo comes into the division for about a year and a half. The fight doesn't happen, but he says, I'm going to fight Gennady Golovkin. This is the guy you say is the best middleweight in the world. I'm the lineal middleweight champion. I'm going to give him a shot. So props to Canelo Alvarez for doing that. In doing that, most of the boxing public feels like Gennady Golovkin wins the first Canelo Alvarez fight and becomes lineal champion, but it's a draw. We move past that. After fighting Vanes, Canelo gives him a rematch. And it's another close fight. I felt like Canelo likely edged it, but another close fight. And Golovkin doesn't get the edge, and Canelo does. So the big victory against Canelo Alvarez doesn't happen for Gennady Golovkin. And he whines for a while. Admittedly, and I like Golovkin, but he whines for a while till about 13 months later. He fights Steve Rhodes in the process, but he fights another top 10 middleweight in Derevyanchenko, a guy some had in the top 5, and he beats him. Okay? So we have a lull here, and COVID happens, obviously. The Zarameta fight. But in 2021, he doesn't fight. Should have fought. He's still whining about Canelo. But in the process, he unifies against Murata. Now, when's the last time we had a unification victory in the middleweight division? Golovkin does it at 40 years old against Murata. So I bring all this up to say these people who say that Golovkin is this hype job. Golovkin doesn't have big wins at middleweight. I mean, what do you call Danny Jacobs? He's a top 3 middleweight. He beat him. And now, after doing all of that, after fighting Canelo twice at middleweight, he's doing something that, another thing that his detractors said he needed to do. He's moving up to 168. For years, I heard, oh, Golovkin needs to move up from middleweight to super middleweight. So he's doing that now in fighting the super middleweight undisputed champion of the world in Canelo Alvarez. And now I'm hearing from his detractors moving the goalpost again that he should just stay at middleweight. We don't want to see this fight. He should stay at middleweight and fight a Charlo or a Boo Boo Andre. No. You wanted to see him move up to super middleweight. Now he's doing that, and he's fighting the best super middleweight in quite some time in Canelo Alvarez. Arguably the best super middleweight since the Super 6 era, the Andre Ward, Carl Froch, Mikkel Kessler, Lucian Butte era, and Canelo Alvarez. So, I just don't, I think a lot of the Golovkin hate comes from, part of it is backlash from HBO's over promotion of Golovkin, right? And I'm just spitballing here. Much like we saw with ESPN with Lomachenko, but every network over promotes its fighters, right? We have Showtime calling Tank Davis a 135-pound champion, a multi-division champion. This is what they do. So there's sort of a boomerang effect there, right? And there's also the Canelo diehards who just cannot give Golovkin any type of credit. And it's unfortunate because when you detract from Golovkin and what he's done in the middleweight division the past decade, you take away from Canelo's achievement. Canelo is 1-1-0 against this guy. And it's arguably Canelo's best victory of his, not arguably, it is. It is Canelo's best victory, his second fight against Gennady Golovkin. And that wasn't a controversial decision. It was debatable. The first fight, maybe you could say controversial, but I just feel like both fights were debatable decisions. I feel like if you count up the 24 rounds as a total, you get 12-12 against these guys. And that's what I'm saying. This is why I don't understand why people don't want to see this third fight, because you have two guys who do not like each other. And I don't agree that Golovkin's not doing anything to sell this fight, because I think Golovkin just being there and Golovkin just being Golovkin is selling this fight. Look, Canelo versus anybody else that's in the picture, they're not promoting this fight at Yankee Stadium. This isn't a big deal. Every single poll that involved casual fans, when you say, who do you want to see Canelo Alvarez fight next, no matter who else is on the list, Golovkin's at the top by a healthy margin. Golovkin just being Golovkin sells this fight. Canelo versus Golovkin 3 is the biggest fight of 2022. An action-packed year with many great fights, but the biggest fight of the year in America as far as pay-per-view numbers will be Canelo versus Triple G3. And don't doubt me on that. I understand that Crawford versus Spence is huge. And I understand it's a better pure fight for us boxing fans. But I'm telling you, as far as pay-per-view buys, I think Canelo versus Triple G3 is a bigger fight. I think as far as live gate numbers, how much money it brings to the table as far as live gate. I think it's going to be better. I think per seat, these seats are going to be going for more money in every way, really, besides maybe the impact that it does for pound rankings, implications for us as boxing fans. Crawford versus Spence is a bigger, pure fight. But I'm telling you, Canelo versus Triple G, Canelo being Canelo and Triple G being Triple G, the guy who Canelo was not able to separate himself from at 160 and 168, that makes this the fight that it is. That makes this the rivalry that it is. Rivalries are rivalries because there's not much separation. There's bad blood there. There was no separation in the first two fights. It was not. Certain rivalries die out, right? They become so one-sided that they just die out. But they have to become one-sided before they die out. There was no separation in this. And we have the biggest draw in boxing, Canelo Alvarez, against a guy who he hasn't been able to shake, a guy who is still over there talking and whining. And I like Golovkin, but the whining does get excessive. It does. And then I do understand why people dislike this about Golovkin, where he whines and then he says, oh, why is everybody mad at me? Why does Canelo hate me so much? There's no hatred on my side. Golovkin sort of talking out of both sides of his mouth. And I think there's a little trolling to that too. But I love this trilogy, man. And where else is Canelo going to go that's bigger than this right now? If Golovkin is truly over the hill, if Golovkin is truly past his prime, not much left, if Golovkin truly is not a super middleweight, then it's perfect timing for Canelo to end the trilogy, to end the rivalry, and bounce back from a loss. But I'm telling you, not so fast. Not so fast. OJ22 in the building. Let's see what we got. Oh, got a super chat. Love your channel, bro. Just showing support. Also, what you think about Canelo being criticized for fighting European fighters, but praising Andre Ward, who I had pound for pound when he retired, for fighting European fighters. It's funny how that happens, right? It's funny how that happens. First of all, how is it that Canelo is going to get criticized for fighting the best fighters with the belts in his weight class? If the best fighters in his weight class with belts happen to be white, fight the white guys. If they happen to be South African, if they happen to be from Peru, if they happen to be from Antarctica, whoever the top guys in your weight class are with belts, with the legit belts, have the belts, and you want them, because Canelo showed, what did he show in 2021? He values hardware. He understands what it takes to be a Mexican great, right? He understands history. He understands his Mexican peers in the past who have made history. So he knows that the higher he goes up in weight and wins legitimate belts and makes history, the more he can separate himself from his peers in the past, his predecessors. And he did that at 168. He said, this guy's got a belt. I'm going to beat him. I'm going to beat this guy with the belt. I'm going to beat that guy with the belt. I'll fight my mandatory in the process. I'm going to fight 4 times in 12 months. And I'm going to take these trinkets. And that's what he did. So they can say whatever they want. They can say whatever they want. But they show, like I said, they show their true colors in what you said. There are other fighters fighting European fighters. And Andre Ward did that, right? Carl Froch, Mikkel Kessler, Arthur Abraham. He fought European fighters. And when you're at 168, if you look at the rankings, if you look at the 4 major belt holders in all of boxing, 17 different weight classes, from 168 up, there are no American fighters with belts. None. So who's he going to fight? Who do they want him to fight? 160 Charlo? Fine. I mean, like I said, if you were Canelo, you could have took the easier PBC belt, PBC deal, and he would have made light work of 160 Charlo. I'm telling you, and he might still in 2023. He might still in early 2024. But who's he supposed to fight? They want him to fight David Benavidez. We've been over this. It was David Benavidez's fault that David Benavidez did not get the Canelo shot, because he would have had he kept on to that belt, and it's David Benavidez's fault he didn't hold on to that belt. He shouldn't have lost it on the scale. Should have kept his nose clean. That's Benavidez's fault. But the good news for Benavidez is the demand will be there in 2023. He will eventually get the Canelo shot, and he will eventually be able to prove if he is indeed the best super middleweight. He'll get that shot. Canelo will give him that shot. And when we talk about European fighters, like, what are they saying about Bivol now? Before, Bivol was a bum, right? Before, oh, he's taking the easier deal, fighting the slower white guys. What do they think about Bivol now? And this shows how little knowledge they have about boxing, because Bivol and Shakur Stevenson are statistically the two best defensive fighters in the sport. Bivol is slick. It's lazy narratives is what it is. What do they think about Beterbiev now? Before this, they were saying Bivol and Beterbiev were European bums. What do they think now? What American fighters are there for Canelo to fight from 168 up besides David Benavidez now? And David Benavidez did not have a belt, and Canelo valued hardware at the time. So you're right, man. It's just lazy narrative. Shout out my guy Remy in the building. What's up, Remy? Appreciate that. Appreciate all the super chats and the support out there. I missed some comments, but let me get to some. GGG not getting that W hurt his legacy. Imagine if Triple G gets that official W against Canelo on his record. Yeah, we could play that game with a lot of fighters too. Imagine if Kovalev would have got the victory against Andre Ward in the first fight. You remember how surprised Andre Ward looked when they said his name after the fight, when they raised his arm? But imagine the trajectory of careers had the judges done what most of the boxing public said they should have done. I'm not saying it's the right or wrong decision. I felt like Kovalev beating Ward in the first fight, there's a stronger case that Kovalev beat Ward in the first fight than there is that Golovkin beat Canelo in the first fight, to be honest. I thought Canelo versus Triple G 1 was closer than Kovalev Ward 1. I thought Kovalev clearly won the first fight. But just imagine how trajectories change. Ward does not go down as an undefeated retired fighter. Kovalev gets a big win. And then all of a sudden, maybe we're talking about Kovalev being a Hall of Fame type fighter. I mean, Ward would have been there regardless from what he did before, but does he retire as an undefeated fighter? Appreciate that. Chicano. Triple G and Canelo should be 1-1 really, according to most fans. So this fight is really a tiebreaker in my eyes. And like I said, I think the word robbed is thrown around there too much. And I definitely feel like that as far as Canelo versus Golovkin. I don't know if Golovkin was ever robbed. I just felt like both fights were close. They were both close. If you had Canelo winning both, okay. I didn't, but if you did, okay. I'm fine with it because it was close. If you had Golovkin winning both, fine. Like I said, I didn't, but I understand it both ways. Both fights were close and debatable, and that's why I need a third. And stylistically, I'm telling you, like, the people who just think this is going to be a cakewalk for Canelo, is particularly the people thinking Canelo wins by late stoppage. Just telling you, not so fast. I don't think it's going to play out that way. Sticking up for Triple G so much, bet on him to beat Canelo then. Chauncey's always on my case as far as betting. Look, it's just not Chauncey, it's not a smart play to bet on a guy even with the good odds. I think he's plus 380 right now. It's not a good play with so many external factors. He just has not gotten the benefit of the doubt against Canelo with the judges. He hasn't gotten, I talked about it being debatable, but he's not gotten the benefit of the doubt in either fight. And on top of that, when I look at the scorecards from the Bivol fight, all three judges scored the first 4 rounds, I believe, for Canelo. And I watched that and I'm like, how is that possible? So either there's a bias there, or either Canelo has something that is attractive to judges when they're ringside. Maybe it's how his punches sound. Maybe it's stylistically. When you have 3 judges standing ringside and all 4 score for Canelo the first 4 rounds against Bivol, I believe that's how it was, and all 3 judges had it close, and they're not on the take, then you have to say maybe there's something stylistically to Canelo's game that is attractive to judges that are sitting ringside. Maybe it's them hearing the fans because it's always a pro Canelo crowd. Maybe it's all of those factors. I don't know, but I can't bet on a guy who has a lot of external obstacles going into this fight. Now, as far as Nando said, real quick, earlier, that Triple G is not holding his weight when it comes to this. I like the back and forth stuff between Canelo and Golovkin so far in the press conferences. I like when they're staring at each other, do the face-off, and as they turn, they're still looking at each other like that and seeing who breaks first. And Canelo broke first, right? And then Triple G kind of looks and he goes like that, right? And gives a thumbs up. I like little stuff like that. I like watching that stuff because you can just see them kind of trolling each other. Golovkin brings a lot to the table just being Golovkin. And Golovkin's the guy who English, obviously, his second or third language, I believe second, and Canelo too. But you can see Canelo is funnier with his English, right? He's a better trash talker with his English. Golovkin, he can be funny with his English, but I don't know if he's a great trash talker with his English. So I just think Golovkin's bringing a lot to the table, though, when it comes to the press conferences and when it comes to just him being himself and being one of the greatest middleweights of the 21st century, you could say. You put him up there with the great middleweights, and him stepping up to super middleweight and them figuring out this trilogy. Let's see, this fight deserves to be hyped. Absolutely everyone in the YTBC will be watching this fight while it's on. True. Honestly, I don't care for this fight maybe back in 2018, but nothing about it is exciting to me anymore. And that's, like, it's fair, right? If you're not into it, you're not into it. That's fair. All I'm saying is I think more people are into it than they're letting on. It's fair to say I wanted to see something fresh. I was already past this. This is 4 years in the past. I want to see something fresh. That's fair. It's a fair statement, but I don't think it's in the past. And I don't believe that Canelo's going to cakewalk this thing. I'm telling you, these guys could fight 10 times and it will be close 10 times. That's just how I see this fight playing out. I'm excited for Triple G3. I think his age not cutting weight will actually help him. And I've heard that too. It's another good point by Juan Garza, and I appreciate the super chat. I'm hearing people say because Golovkin is moving up in weight that it's actually going to be an advantage for Golovkin. That if this fight, in other words, like the narrative initially was he's moving up to Canelo's weight now. So we have it at Canelo's weight. We have Golovkin well past his prime. Canelo is better than he was 4 years ago when he fought Triple G, and Triple G is not the fighter that he was 4 years ago. That's initially what we were hearing, but now there's this new narrative coming out, and it makes sense that Golovkin is not going to have to cut weight. Maybe he's going to bring more power up to 168, being that he's not going to have to rehydrate so much, being that he's not going to have to cut weight. And it's interesting. It's another interesting theory. It's another thing to throw in to the mix. Ultimately, we're not going to find out till fight night, but my official position on all of this is I don't think it matters where they fight. In other words, I keep throwing out Pacquiao Marquez, right? Pacquiao Marquez, lower weight classes, first two fights, put on clinics, close fights. Could have went either way. And then the third fight is coming, and it's at 147, and they say, Marquez isn't a welterweight. Marquez is moving up. Pacquiao's a different beast. Marquez is past his prime now. And then what happens? We get more of the same, except we get a better Marquez. So you could say, yeah, maybe Marquez not having to cut weight. Maybe Marquez coming in at 147, all jacked up. And look, people throw out the juiced accusations, but look, there are juiced accusations when it came to Pacquiao and other fighters throughout recent history. So all things being even, Marquez looked better at 147 than when he fought Pacquiao in the lower weight classes. And the narrative coming in was he wasn't going to be better. He was going to be worse. And Pacquiao was going to be better. And therefore, Pacquiao was going to destroy Marquez. He was likely going to stop him. I'm telling you, I was around the YTBC then. Nobody was picking Marquez to win that fight. Nobody. And what happened? The night of the fight or the morning after, everybody was saying how they thought Marquez won the fight. And they thought Marquez won the fight then more convincingly than they felt Marquez won. The people who thought Marquez won the first or second fight, more convincingly than he won the first two fights. That Marquez looked better in the third fight than he did in the second and first fight. So it ended up being a lazy narrative, just this throwing stuff out there that since Pacquiao is in his prime, since Pacquiao looks better at 147, since Marquez is past his weight, therefore. It doesn't always work that way. Sometimes you get two guys who are stylistically made for each other. It's like the boxing gods put these two guys together. Boxing guys form these two guys, put them together and said, this is the perfect stylistic matchup. And we need to see these guys fight 3 or 4 times. Canelo and Golovkin are those two guys. They're meant for each other. I'm telling you, they're meant for each other. This is not going to be a cakewalk for Canelo. It's not. And therefore, if Canelo wins this fight, it's going to be a great win. I don't want to hear anything after about, Golovkin's up there in age. It waters down this Canelo victory. No. If Canelo wins this fight and wins it convincingly and puts this trilogy to rest, it's a great win. It's another great win on a storied career of Canelo Alvarez. That's just where I'm at with it. I don't want to hear anything about the age after the fight. This guy just unified at 160 against Murata in Japan. I'm not saying Murata is the greatest thing since sliced bread, but that's a really good win. Seeing Batman Boxing in the building, I think more people will be excited for this fight as it nears. And I think so too. I think as it gets closer, we're still 2.5 months out. As it gets closer, and I will be there. And as it gets closer, the buzz will build. And this will have big fight vibes. Mexican Independence Day weekend. A lot going on in sports that weekend. A lot to bet on. And it's going to have big fight vibes. It will. I got Triple G saludos from Mexico. Only worth for me if Canelo embarrasses Triple G. The fight was made, so and I'm going to watch it. Okay. Triple G should have taken the fight in 2020 instead of choosing Zeromet. I don't think the Canelo fight was on the table for him in 2020, but I think he was upset that Canelo sort of turned his back on Golovkin and went about his career. And Golovkin was like the spurned boyfriend. Like when the homecoming queen breaks up with you, you're not happy about it. You continue to look at her Facebook profile through shadow accounts, of course, because you act like you unfollowed her. But you're stalking her quietly, and you're upset that she moved on and she's dating somebody else. And that was Golovkin for a while there when it came to Canelo. He was not happy that Canelo moved on with his career. He was looking for that trilogy. But when the homecoming queen makes a 180 and points to you and says, let's do it again, Triple G is here to do it again. Any value on putting some kind of money on this? Are you putting anything down? I'm assuming you're putting the over. Yes, I'm playing the over if, depending on what the value is for the over. If it's anywhere close to even, I'm playing the over. I just don't see either guy knocking each other out. 24 rounds with each other. And I didn't even see either guy get hurt. And they were landing bombs on each other. Bombs. And I think Canelo has a granted chin. He's shown that against big punchers. He went up to 175 and faced Kovalev and took flush shots from him. So I don't think 160 or 168, Golovkin is going to put him on the floor. Possibly put him on the floor, but not separate him from his senses. And I don't think Canelo is going to hurt Triple G either. I still think Triple G at 40, 41 years old has a granted chin. I don't think either one of these guys can seriously hurt each other. And it's not that they can't crack, because they can. We know both of them can, but they have granite chins. And that was the argument from some, that it wasn't a great first and second fight, that they were both really good. There's a theory out there that you have to have a fighter get hurt for it to be a great fight. That's an ingredient you have to have in a great fight. I don't agree with that. And the reason I don't agree with that is sometimes you have guys with great chins face off against each other, and it's just impossible for them to hurt each other. We saw that in a smaller fashion with Stanionis versus Butayev. Both guys were landing bombs on each other, but they couldn't hurt each other. And I think Canelo and Golovkin, another reason I think there's going to be a close decision. They're just so as far as betting money, I'm looking for the over-under on this fight. And I think there are too many external factors to take a waiver out on Golovkin. I think there are a lot of things going against him coming in as far as external factors that I'll get into on a separate video. Canelo beat Triple G twice, fairly competitive, but Canelo is the better man. And once again, that's a fair assessment. Think that situation a bit different, as there, in my opinion, there was valued arguments on who was better. And for me, not in the case. Shout out D-Style Boxing in the building. And I'll be on the round table on Thursday night with D-Style Boxing and the crew. Always looking forward to that. People say Triple G is old. We're praising Errol Spence versus 42-year-old Pacquiao and Ugas versus Pacquiao. Good point. Good point. 24 rounds odds-wise makes KO more likely. I don't know. I just don't know. I think these guys can fight 48 rounds, 60 rounds. But it's a good point, though, because if you look at a rivalry that I compare this to, keep comparing this to, Pacquiao Marquez, what happened in the fourth fight? It took 42 rounds, but Marquez knocked out Pacquiao. I guess if you're in there with big punchers, round after round after round, eventually the odds of something happen get better, to your point. That's a good point. That's a good point. Maybe there is something to that. Maybe there is something to, maybe this is the fight where one guy gets hurt. And being that Triple G is the older fighter, it's more likely it'll be him. It's a good point. GGG is solid. Still, he beat a champion recent. It's a solid, respectable fight for Canelo, especially after a loss. I agree. Triple G is going to sleep. I don't agree. And D-Style, maybe a little friendly wager on that. I take the over, you take the under. We'll see as the fight gets closer. I don't completely rule out Canelo stopping Triple G to the body. As good as I thought Triple G looked in his last two fights, if I look back at body work of Murata and imagine Canelo throwing those with more. Good point. It makes sense that if he hurts Triple G, it would be to the body, right? Canelo was hurt in the second fight if I remember right. There was a moment like when Triple G caught him with a shot, and it looked like maybe Canelo buckled a little bit. But looking back at that fight, and I've watched it a couple of times, I just feel like Canelo was never really hurt. Triple G is motivated for this fight. Yeah, Canelo is angry, but that's going to make Triple G come at his best. It's just funny, like, and I love it. Like, this is the reason, one of the many reasons I love this trilogy is like, I love how the Canelo fans feel about the Golovkin fans, and how the Golovkin fans feel about the Canelo fans. There is real hatred there. It doesn't stop at the fighters. It doesn't stop at the fighters, and that's what great rivalries do too. Like the Lakers fans hated the Celtics fans. The Bulls fans hated the Knicks fans. The Ohio State fans hate the Michigan fans. The Duke fans hate the North Carolina fans. It's healthy for a rivalry. Like I'm a Saints fan. We hate the Falcons fans. Even if it does get one-sided. But for a true rivalry, it has to be even. And this is even, and there's hatred involved. And I understand why both fighters kind of hate each other. It's not just that they couldn't separate each other from each other, but it's just like they get on each other's nerves, right? It's kind of like when brothers share a room with each other. They just can't get out of each other's way. They always fight. And this sort of has that vibe to it. Like I just get the feeling like Triple G, like I said, he didn't like the fact that Canelo moved on with his career. He felt spurned. And so he hates Canelo. And then Triple G takes these shots, like these little side swipes, these little passive aggressive swipes at Canelo. And Canelo catches them. And Canelo tries to go about his business, but Triple G continues to take these little passive-aggressive shots at Canelo. And then Canelo finally turns and he says, this guy's an a-hole. It is funny to see Golovkin's reaction to that because Golovkin's like, what did I say? What did I say? And everybody knows what he said. Everybody knows it. Everybody sees it. And Golovkin say, well, wait, what did I say? So you understand why both fighters kind of get under each other's skin. But ultimately what it comes down to is you can't have that if there isn't an even rivalry, right? If one guy separates himself from the other guy, it doesn't matter if the other guy talks straight. Like Caleb Plant's out there saying that the fight was close with him and Canelo, and I got mad watching the Bivol fight because I should have done that. No, you weren't gonna pull off anything that Bivol did. And you never will. You can fight Canelo 10 times, it would stop with 10 stoppages. So just stop. So when a guy is easily beaten, there's no rivalry there, and people dismiss what he says. But the fact that people are still entertaining what Golovkin is saying tells us that this was an even rivalry, and there was demand for a third fight. Speed and power and technique, I could see a finish. Triple G just had a good poker face. He was hurt by those shots. Possibly. That's a little mind reading, though. I don't know. The way Canelo is talking, I feel he would be disappointed if it doesn't end in distance. I don't know. I think Canelo feels this. I'm hoping Canelo is taking this fight as seriously as he needs to be. I'm hoping Canelo is not taking this fight as a get back on my feet fight. And I don't think he is. I think he sees this as a real rivalry, and we're going to have a great fight. Canelo told Hearn he wanted Billy Joe Saunders for May and Golovkin in September 2020. Okay. Well, I must have missed that. Golovkin now is a way tougher fight than Jamal. That's what I'm saying. It is. And if he beats Golovkin, he deserves all the respect in the world. Triple G can't bank on taking punishment and relying on toughness to last 12 rounds. He's going to get hurt, in my opinion. And I don't think he just relies on toughness. He's got technique to his game. He still has shifting. Great jab, one of the best jabs in boxing. People keep sleeping on that. And we saw what a jab can do against Canelo with Bivol. And we saw that in the first two fights. Triple G kept Canelo at bay at moments in the fight. um, enough to keep both those fights close with the jab. It wasn't just power. Triple G's not a caveman. He's got technique, and it all starts with the jab. Basic boxing 101. When the fights gets closer, we'll be excited to call the homies, bring a few cases of beer, and get the grill going. I'm excited. It's going to be a better fight than we think. I agree. I did think he was hurt, but what impressed me was the 8-punch follow-up combo by Triple G and how Canelo dodged all of them. Yeah, and he does. There was a flurry after that. I just didn't think, like, watching it a few times after that, Canelo was ever really in serious danger. Canelo has gone further up in weight, but Triple G might still be the naturally bigger guy. People forget Canelo is not a big 168-pounder, and he's not. But also, I never felt like Golovkin was a big 160-pounder either. Remember, you had a lot of weight bullies at 160. A lot of weight bullies. Danny Jacobs ballooned big time. Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. would balloon big time. A lot of these middleweights were guys who were 180, even maybe 190 on fight night. And Golovkin was much smaller than them. So I think naturally both of these guys are pretty close to each other, no matter what weight class they fight at. Much like Pacquiao Marquez. Canelo is still upset that Triple G accused him of PEDs in the rematch, and that's another thing. That's another thing. It's like these little shots that Golovkin takes at Canelo. It's like the little brother taking shots at the big brother. And I know Golovkin is older, but I think the relationship is more like Canelo, big brother, Golovkin, little brother. The little brother takes shots at the big brother until the big brother turns around and says, you know what? I'm tired of this. We're going to fight. We're going to have it out. And Golovkin has been taking these little shots at Canelo. Canelo's been seeing it, and Canelo's been taking shots at Golovkin too. But Golovkin, in a way, is an a-hole. Triple G doesn't even talk much. Yep. But when he does, he's got some funny English, man. He has little punchlines. He has little punchlines. Both of them do. Triple G has a nagging jab. I'll give him that. He does. He has a great jab. I agree, Lil Penny, but I also disagree that he says a whole lot when Canelo is not around. Triple G took a lot of punches versus Shevchenko. Punishment. Derevchenko, JC in the building. Salute Calix. And shout out to JC because JC called Bam Rodriguez knocking out Sora Vise. And I think I called JC crazy. I think I said Bam Rodriguez by decision. And Vegas saw Bam Rodriguez by decision. I just didn't see Bam winning by knockout. And I was high on Bam before, even higher now because he even exceeded my expectations in that fight. What a performance. What a performance. So shout out to everybody who tuned in. I'll be back earlier tomorrow with more boxing talk and more videos to come as well.